How's it going, everyone? I hope you're having a good one so far. This is a brief video about astral projection and out-of-body experience. I'm going to try a new formula for making videos. I'm just going to say, hey, here's something you can do, and then I will go further into it, as opposed to going into things and breaking them down one at a time. Because I feel as though giving the information right away is beneficial for the people who are already experienced, and then if people want to stick around for more depth, they can. So, biggest tip for astral projection, actual astral projection, not just scrying in the spirit vision, as some call it, or playing around in their imagination. We're talking about facilitating an out-of-body experience here. This isn't going to necessarily teach you how to do it every single time, because you actually have to prepare yourself. And sometimes, even being experienced, you can try and try, or do, and you're just not in the right place at the right time, or the state of mind, or whatever. This is the method I use every time, and there are still times that I can't get out of my body due to a lack of etheric pressure, or due to a lack of concentration, whatever. We'll get into it now. The major advice is to learn to work with your etheric force, learn to stretch it, learn to compress it, learn to project it. And once you have that etheric force conjured and collected, drape an astral veil over it. This can be the form of an animal. This can be a form of this could be like an astral double of yours. This can be whatever you want, whatever the form is. But it will affect your experience most of the time, depending on what form you are projecting into. For some of you, it will be easier to create the astral veil or drape or cloak, what have you, and then to project your force into it. Once you have done this, once you have bound the etheric double and the astral double, so to speak, once you have them bound and woven, you will then project your noetic or psychic force into it. You will project your psyche. You will project your consciousness and awareness into the thing. And for most of you, if you just keep like an orb of etheric astral essence, and you just feel around in that with your subtle senses and your psyche, that will be enough of an experience for most of you to play around with for months and months and months. But after you are comfortable with that, then you can actually begin stretching, detaching, or projecting, sinking in. I find it much easier to go in than to go out. Now, we can go a little bit more into some techniques now. We can go a little bit more into theory now. But for those of you who just want to know, like, what is this about? This is what it's about. The best piece of advice that I can give you is to bind your astral and etheric double, and then to project your awareness into it. Project your psyche into it, your noetic force, if you will. As far as actual like techniques for getting this to happen go, I've noticed that, like I said, sometimes with certain forces, with certain currents, with certain projections, it's easier to create the form and then project the force into it. Other times it's easier to project the force and then drape the form over it. Another thing that you can do is have something pull like a string out of you, and then to crawl out of that string, or you can project or cast it or whatever. You can weave webs of your etheric force and follow them out. There's a really interesting, I actually stumbled across this by accident. When I was a kid, I lived with my grandparents. And their grandparents. So their house changed very, very minimally over the course of, the 30 so years that I've been over there. So I can imagine their like living room very, very easily, very well, very deep detail. I can almost count the wood grains on some of the cabinets. What I use this information for is what I call dislocation or translocation meditation. Dislocation can sound a bit painful for some, so I typically will call it translocation meditation. And what you'll do is you'll sit somewhere that isn't the image you're going to use. Like if I'm sitting in here in the study, I'll close my eyes and I will imagine that I'm sitting in the living room of my grandparents' house, or somewhere that is very familiar to you. Perhaps a childhood classroom, perhaps a park, perhaps a certain place that you would go that is very, very, very familiar to you. And for those of you who maybe don't have a lot of experience with other environments, try imagining that you're in a different room than you're in, even within your same house. But what you're going to do is you're going to hold this image in your mind's eye until you actually forget where you are. And there will be this sort of like, for me at least, there's this sort of like shock of like, well, wait, I don't know where I actually am right now. And what I do is I drop out of that. I completely, wherever the etheric signature condenses at that point, I'll neutralize it. I will stretch out and put the energy in my being back to where it was before I realized that, and let that sort of fade away. And that space that is created, you can actually step or project into. For those of you who aren't ready to step out of a comfortable space yet, you can open your eyes and receive the gnosis startle, or the shock of where you actually are versus where you thought you were or where you seemed to be. The translocation meditation is one of the most simple but shocking techniques that I've shown people. The people who actually get into it and actually try it have some pretty crazy experiences. Okay, like I've, for instance, myself, sometimes experienced my grandfather, who is deceased, as being in that room or walking into that room. And there are certain conversations that occur that trigger memories I had forgotten about, or I get advice about a future circumstance that might occur, or something that's happening now that I'm not sure how to handle. There is also the capacity, while astral projecting, to perform, I wouldn't say greater or more powerful or stronger magic, even though I just did. It's just a different kind of magic. When you gain the capacity to force an out-of-body experience or allow an out-of-body experience, your scrying takes on a different life, a different energy. Your divination, you can perform divinations from the astral plane. If you know your runes, you can drop runes. If you have the tarot deck memorized, like, you can draw cards out of the deck. And the divinations that are performed on the astral plane, or not just the astral plane, the astral plane proper, people call them different things, but when you are actually in the spirit world, we'll call it for now, everything that you do is just at a different level, at a different capacity. I've often explained it as writing a letter to the manufacturer, having them make you something, and then mail it, ship it to you, as a metaphor for like a normal working and normal ceremony. Astral projecting and doing a ceremony or a divination or an enchanting, like enchanting a talisman or something, is like knocking on the office door of the engineer or the machinist in the machine shop and saying, hey, here's the blueprint, and then having them make it for you and then give it to you. It is that different. This is one reason I talk about scrying and astral projecting so much, because scrying is sort of the basis for astral projection. And everything you do in magic is much, much more greatly empowered when you have the ability to turn your senses inward, or to sever your senses from your day-to-day solar self, creating an enchantment. And if you actually have the capacity for projecting geometries and things like that, like if I were to make a talisman and I were to actually pull myself out and project, and I were to then formulate that energy that I am projecting into the item, and I am doing so in a way that is creating geometries all throughout that talisman or whatever the piece of paper is. Say I were trying to make a protective talisman. I might fill the item with a pattern that is essentially a grid astrally. I can imagine a grid. Just to make it really, really simple, I'll actually draw this out. I'll actually draw something that is approximating a very simple enchantment. And yeah, I know most of you don't do your enchantments this way. That's fine. Maybe you can start. So, a very, very, very simple explanation of what I'm talking about is projecting an astral grid into the item. Projecting with your imagination, not just your visualization, but your imagination, into the item, and then impregnating that astral form that is now tied to the item, projecting etheric force into the astral form. And now, as you can see, this is comprised of a bunch of triangles and or rectangles. The number 3 relates to Saturn and Binah, which is a very protective force, and triangles are made of 3 sides. The square or rectangle is comprised of 4 sides, and it relates to Jupiter and Hesed, which is also a relatively protective force. Now, this doesn't seem very strong or intricate, but most of you probably wouldn't want to try to do more than this because it would end up being more complicated. But if you really, really wanted to, you could add much more to each of the geometries just by simply adding in more depth, more triangles. Come on. For some reason it doesn't like the other way. And again, this is just very fucking simple, but like, if you actually try this when you are enchanting your implements, it will give you a framework with which to anchor that energy much more intentionally and much more effectively. Now, that's just doing it right here, right now, with your astral and etheric force consciously. Imagine if you could actually astral project and connect with the item at a non-physical level instead of just having your faculties do it for you. This is one of the great benefits of learning out of body projection, astral projection, whatever you want to call it. This is a huge, huge benefit of it. Imagine actually performing your ceremonies on the astral plane. Imagine doing blessings when you can astral project and get closer or to the person that you're trying to heal or bless. Or imagine being able to astral project and being able to do bindings and baneful on the person that you're actually trying to contact. This is the next level for a lot of you. But it's going to take a lot. We're talking no more TikTok. We're talking no more YouTube shorts. We're talking no more instant gratification. We're not chasing dopamine anymore. Instead of wanting to watch TV shows and be distracted hour by hour, you're actually going to have to focus your attention for more than just a few moments at a time. If you really think you're going to go from scrolling TikTok and YouTube shorts for an hour or two a day every day to astral projecting in a month, you're either extremely disciplined and gifted or delusional. For most people, this takes months and months and months and months and months of work, if not years. It is worth the time though, because the level of contact that you receive on other things, the capacity with which you are able to affect things increases exponentially, and the capacity with which other beings and entities that you're working with to contact you increases exponentially as well. If you have a hard time, shalom. If you have a hard time with visualization and meditation and things like that, a really good book is Secrets of Creative Visualization by Philip Cooper. That has a lot of good stuff in it. There is also In the Mind's Eye by Arnold Lazarus. That one's more psychological. This one's more spiritual. There's also Astral Dynamics by Robert Bruce, which is a really, really good template. It's a bit wordy, and it can be a bit confusing, but these are good places to start. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please leave them below, or feel free to email me as usual. And have a good rest of the day. Hope to see you in the next one.